because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
And I'm Laura.
And today we're talking about actually the first Spike Lee film we've ever covered on this show, 2006's wonderfully twisty bank heist, Inside Man.
My name is Dalton Russell. Pay strict attention to what I say because I choose my words carefully and I never repeat myself. I've told you my name. That's the who. The where could most readily be described as a prison cell. But there's a vast difference between being stuck in a tiny cell and being in prison. The what is easy. Recently I planned and set in motion events to execute the perfect bank robbery. That's also the when. As for the why, beyond the obvious financial motivation, it's exceedingly simple. Because I can. Which leaves us only with the how. And therein, as the bard would tell us, lies the rub.
And we're honored to be joined by Roxana Hadadi. Roxana is a TV critic at Vulture and New York Magazine, and if I may say, one of my favorite podcast guests on shows that I listen to. Welcome to Cows in the Field, Roxana.
Hello. Thank you so much. That was very kind. I appreciate it very much. And I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So the film we're talking about today is Inside Man, and it is interesting. I we didn't plan to have this be our first Spike Lee film. I mean, it's just how this shakes out that we haven't covered any other Spike Lee on this podcast, and it's an interesting entree into Spike Lee. Actually, it's possible that this was the first Spike Lee film I saw, actually.
I think it was mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to start there. So when did you first see the film? What did you think of it then? And how do you feel about it now coming back to it?
Well, everything is very murky past a certain point because I think the last couple of years have completely warped and distorted our sense of time. And wiped out my memories of the past. But I'm pretty sure I saw it around the time it came out. I believe my partner and I saw it in a theater. I think it was my first Spike. Actually, as I say that is a complete lie because Malcolm X was my first Spike movie. And that was one that I had watched, I believe, with my father. So I had some history with Spike Lee, obviously knew his persona as a filmmaker, and sort of his approach to New York filmmaking and his legacy there. And I just remember being very gripped by two things. I really loved the Clive Owen character. And as someone who has long, for right or for wrong, been drawn to vigilante justice, I was like, okay, interesting. This is fascinating. I love this idea. And I also just remember the feeling of being challenged by the film and sort of how right from the beginning we are breaking the fourth wall. We're being told to pay attention. We know that there is some kind of puzzle or request that the film is making of us. And so then it becomes this two-pronged thing, right? It's getting lost within the narrative, which is that twisty, turny, labyrinthine kind of story. And also you're watching it with at least for me, I was watching it with which parts of this are going to matter in the end? And of course it's all of it, right?
Yeah.
So I think then it's also just asking you on a different level to become involved with the narrative. So I definitely remember those two things that sort of stuck out to me. And then I think for a little while it was just always on TV. So I remember it became sort of a rewatch in the background kind of thing, like a Gladiator. It's on TNT all the time type of thing. And then I rewatched it more intentionally before we spoke and are speaking right now. And I just remember that same sense of like falling into the story. And also now, that sort of 25th Hour has like emerged as my favorite Spike film. Sort of thinking about like Spike's post 9/11 filmmaking and what that has become. So that probably was too many answers to your question.
That was
But
good.
that's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that I just, blurted out at you.
Did you, Laura, had you had any experience with this film before I showed it to you for the first time?
No.
Yeah. And I don't remember when we first watched it, but
I think we watched it with your
Mhm.
folks in
I
Pennsylvania.
think it's one of my dad's like movies. I think he likes it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it was like it must have been then somewhere between like 2011 and 2014 then,
Yeah.
I would say.
Mhm.
So yeah, I came to it late. I totally missed it. I think it came out in that period of time I was in college and not paying as much attention to what was coming, like the current releases.
Mhm.
And yeah, I wish I were better about my Spike Lee filmography. I feel like I probably watched like maybe a fourth, if that, of
I
his
know.
filmography.
Yeah, we're a bit far behind.
He's somewhat, and he's made so many movies. But like my first experience with Spike Lee was actually in film class, and we started with Do the Right Thing.
Mhm.
And so, I had that kind of iconic Spike Lee in my head, and I was really, I remember just being really, my first impression was just really surprised. This is a Spike Lee film. Of course, now that I watched it again, and now that I've seen more of Spike's work, I'm like, of course, this is a Spike Lee film. But that was my first impression when I was watching it.
This film is more of like him in director for hire mode, which is interesting because the style is all there, but it's sublimated to this plot and to the twistiness of the plot. That was the thing that I liked so much about it, and I don't think when I first saw it, I knew who Spike Lee was. I think if I'm being honest, I watched it and I was just like, this is fun. And it's got a cool twist. And you're, as you were saying, Roxana, it engages you because you immediately, it's a puzzle and you're trying to figure out, okay, how is this guy going to get out? And is he in prison? Because he says, I'm in a jail cell.
I'm in a cell. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm in a cell, right?
Yeah.
And it is a kind of prison, but not the one we're thinking.
Mhm.
And I think there was I was trying to think as you guys were talking, there must have been a moment in that aughts period when there were all these twisty films, I think, right? It was like maybe it was a 10-year period coming from like Usual Suspects going through 2006, but it
The
feels
ending is very Usual Suspects. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. It feels like there was something like this was of the moment in that way. And that's why I think of it kind of as more of a director for hire thing, because Spike is allowing himself to be carried by the prevailing winds in a certain way. So one of the things though that struck me on this watch was how the central players are representations in different ways of some of the moral complexities that we all as human beings sort of face.
Mhm.
And in particular, the contrast being between we have duties to one another as sort of human beings, like say duties not to steal, duties not to punch each other in the face and respect one another and so on. But we also feel a certain pull to want to do things which would be good or have good consequences for people. So the central villain of this film, Arthur Case, Christopher Plummer, he is somebody who has sort of done this kind of trade-off, right? He
Right.
sacrificed people. He gave up Jews to the Nazis and so on and profited. And then what he did, he says, oh, I'm like buying back my guilt, right? Or I'm like buying off my guilt. But another way to think of it is that he took the money that he earned and has done all this philanthropic activity. Now, how much has he done? Is it sufficient? Let's just to make it interesting, stipulate he's done quite a bit of philanthropic activity. I mean, we see the little, I don't know, whatever, the little
The office is like
awards
full
he's
of
got.
there's like awards, there's plaques, there's recognition. He has reached a level of New York elitism that, is brought about by that kind of philanthropy. You can't be in those circles without doing these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he's done a lot of good. And, maybe that good would not have been done had the money that he ended up taking from the Nazis just stayed with the Nazis. Like, just maybe, right? Who knows? But like if you stipulate that, then you have an interesting case.
Mhm.
And but I think nonetheless the film portrays him as a villain, right? He's a villain and he's clearly portrayed as morally compromised. But this theme just recurs again and again, right? So the
Mhm.
same thing comes up with Frasier, and is he gonna take? Did he take this $100,000 from the crime
Denzel
scene?
Washington's detective character, right?
Exactly. Yeah. What about what's he gonna do with the diamond at the end that he gets and all this? And so there's this kind of trade-off that these characters are facing. Anyway, the whole time I was wondering, I knew the ending, but the whole time I was sort of thinking, where does the movie fall on these lines?
Mhm,
And I
mhm.
think the movie's perspective on this is it's really complicated. Except for the Arthur case. He's a bad guy. But I mean that just seems the movie seems to be clear about that. But I think the other characters kind of fall on a spectrum, and it wasn't clear to me like if at the end Frasier is supposed to be ultimately this uncorruptible hero or actually kind of a weaker version of Arthur Case. Like he's facing the same dilemma that Arthur faced, and he has throughout the film. Does he take this money, which would be a dereliction of duty, right? This
Mhm.
The
diamond,
diamond.
and
Yeah.
just do what he wants with it, right? It's a money that belonged to a bad guy. I could just take it and give it to my girlfriend, and we can get married. Wouldn't that be great? And I think similarly on the other side, you have the Clive Owen character, Dalton Russell, who's
Mhm.
what the line that he said that just jumped out at me was,
I'm no martyr. I did it for the money. But it's not worth much if you can't face yourself in the mirror. Respect is the ultimate currency.
So he has, and again, has that notion respect, right? Which is this kind of inalienable thing that you either have or you don't, you afford someone or not, and that's something which blocks you from using them as a tool for getting good or bad outcomes. And he sort of the film sort of sets him up as this, although yeah, he's a bad guy, he robbed the bank and everything, but he's sort of doing it in the service of this higher cause of stealing from some guy who's done bad things. But again, I think it's interesting that in a way he doesn't respect the people who were just hanging out in the bank. He subjects them to quite a bit of psychological pain and suffering. Like they have to go through. And the poor lady who has to strip, she seems
Mm.
pretty upset about the prospect of having to take off her clothes in front of people. Although ultimately she doesn't. And these people are put through quite a lot of turmoil, not knowing if they're going to survive this event. And that is in the service of what he thinks to be the greater good, namely maybe exposing this guy or stealing from him or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but these people are he just sees them as unfortunate bystanders who kind of get in the way. And granted, he is generally nice to them, but you can imagine this would be quite traumatic. And so for me, I'm watching the film, I'm thinking, yeah, like when I first saw it, I was just like, Dalton Russell, good guy. Frasier, good guy. Jodie Foster's character, Madeline White, bad. And
Right.
Arthur Case, bad. But now I watch the film and it really does feel like it's made by a person who's an adult who's just like, no, these are really gray things. Like, this is very complicated. Each of these characters has dimensions of goodness and dimensions of badness to them. And we kind of we're like them. They're in this situation of having to make really difficult choices,
Mhm.
and those choices are the things that ultimately define us, and we can't sort of escape that. So we're kind of all of us are going to be one of these four or whatever. We're going to be one of these characters facing a choice like this. And to me, that makes the film more than just the kind of average heisty, twisty thriller that I normally quite like. But it seemed deeper than that to me.
Mhm. Uh, do you not it's interesting that you would say that they exist on a spectrum because I think you can make the argument that Case does. I don't think you could make any argument that Madeline does, that she exists on a spectrum. So I'm curious how you would
Yeah, that's
make
a
that
good point. I think
argument.
she is the most cynical of the
Yeah,
four sort of principles. And
yeah. Helping
yeah,
what? Helping Osama's nephew? Yeah,
yeah, she is
buy real
entirely
estate.
self-centered and
Mhm.
um I think she doesn't seem to be concerned at all about the broader consequences of her
Right.
of her
And I
actions.
think that
Yeah, I
her
think that's right.
character does something provides an interesting function for the story in that Dalton like you said, has this sort of speech about respect. And respect inherently is like a immaterial concept, right? I mean, like who respects whom is, questionable. But like Madeline having power as her only motivator
Yeah.
is sort of an interesting way to add a wrinkle to Case. Because like I don't know what the answer is about whether Case has done more good than he's done harm.
hmm
But I think Madeline is a difficult character to assume any positive intent coming
Yeah.
from her, right? Like she is a pure creature of, I don't necessarily want to say evil. Maybe I'll say evil. Screw it. But like
Yeah.
she at least is not just like complicit in terrible things happening. She has an active hand in terrible things happening. And it's one of those things where probably you could make the argument that like, sure, Osama's like nephew can buy property, whatever. Like let's put that part out of it. But her essential awareness of who Case is, there's not really a sense from her that she thinks about the question we're thinking about.
Yeah.
I don't think she is considering, well, if we keep Case around, like he does whatever. For her, it is strictly a job, and there is no moral consideration past that point. And I think that it's interesting to me how everyone sort of says that to her. Like Frasier essentially says that to her. Dalton essentially says that to her. And it's just like impervious until there's no way out for her in that final scene. But even then, it feels like she's going to survive and she's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. No, I think she has no conscience, right?
Right.
That's the interesting contrast between her and Case. Is Case has done really horrible things, but
Mhm.
he seems to have a conscience. I mean, look, he says this.
Yeah,
So,
no, I believe he
so
does.
he's like, I've done bad things. I'm trying to, atone for my sins.
Right.
How hard he's trying to atone, it's unclear. I mean, he's got a really nice office, so I don't know if he's trying that hard, but he's certainly trying. Whereas Madeline's trying not at all. You're right.
Right.
My guess is at the end when she is threatened with blackmail, her and the
Mhm.
mayor are threatened with blackmail. She's just going to throw the mayor under the bus. If it comes to that,
She's
she
going to
will
give up the
just
mayor. She's going to give
yeah
up Case. There will be
yeah
something that she does to protect herself. Right. I definitely feel like she's a character that she'll just be like, all right, well, I'm going to take my services to Dubai and I will see you guys around.
yep
She is
Mhm.
leaving the US.
yep. But she also is such a slippery and compelling character. This is
Mhm.
fun. Actually, I'm glad we're talking so much about Madeline because she
Jodie is having
says,
so much fun. She's having a great
"Oh,
time.
So much
so
fun.
yeah."
Mhm.
One of the lines she says that I love is so she bargains her way into the standoff and
Right.
there are all these men. It's one of these great things with Jodie Foster because it's the same thing with Silence of the Lambs where because she's so short,
Mhm.
right? And she's surrounded by these taller
It's
men.
the elevator shot.
Elevator
Yeah.
shot, exactly.
Mhm.
And but in this case, they all have like guns, like semi-automatic guns and everything. And she's going in, and they're all like, "Are you sure you want to do this? You're walking in. They have AK-47s, and they've got hostages."
I know. And they put the hat and the coat on
Yeah.
her so she looks like a little child
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
like oversized.
Yeah, but she says, "I didn't get where I've gotten by making enemies. Like I get here
Mm-mm.
by making friends. Like this is what I
Mhm.
do. Don't worry." Like she
Mhm.
just is so competent and that confidence is really compelling. And I really love how the film sets up that dynamic both with her and her discussion with Case.
Mhm.
Or excuse me, she actually has discussions with all three of the characters, all three of the male characters
She's the
at
link.
different
Yeah.
points. She's
Yeah.
the link, yeah. And each of them thinks they have power over her, but like ultimately she is never phased by it,
Mm-mm.
right? Even when she has less power, like when I'm thinking in particular when she goes into the bank and she talks to Dalton, she doesn't know yet what Case has done.
Right.
And Dalton is like, "Let me tell you what this guy did," but she's unfazed.
Great
She's just
poker
like,
face. Does
yeah,
not.
Yeah.
so powerful. I
She's
love
just
it.
like, she does a little glance down and she's like, well, that's helpful information for me for later. Like, you
Mhm.
know?
No, I mean,
she's
she's
like, and now I have leverage on Case. Fantastic.
Looking for this? This could be very embarrassing to your employer. He should have destroyed this a long time ago. He didn't, so now it's mine. Now, if the day ever comes where I have to stand before a judge and account for what I did here, you and your boss will do whatever it takes to help me.
You get out of here with that envelope, and we'll pay you a lot of money.
I'll keep that in mind.
You're not going to tell me how you're planning to get out of here, are you?
I'm gonna walk right out the front door. Anything else?
How did you know about all this?
Doesn't matter. Fact is, all lies, all evil deeds, they stink. You can cover them up for a while, but they don't go away.
Murder will out?
Precisely.
Well, I still don't get what you're doing here.
Really?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the whole thing. It's like information, right? Like how much information can she accumulate to armor herself with and like to weaponize against others. So that character is just everyone in the film is doing really exceptional work, but how precise she is very impressive to me always. And it's a very simplistic reading. Whatever, I don't care. I love the way that Denzel very sarcastically delivers Miss White when he's talking to her in a film that is full of like very uh messy racial kind of things happening. Just the way that he handles her, I think, is impressive and well done. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of just like how New Yorkers relate to each other things about this film that are both like sort of amusing and also sort of bleak.
Yeah. In terms of the casual racism thing, I was gonna say, I mean, maybe 1 point for Madeline, although it's not really, is that I don't think is she the only person who doesn't make any sort of derogatory comments
That
towards
is
any
interesting.
other group
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
in
interesting.
this movie. And
She
that's
did.
purely
Yeah.
because by being an amoral or immoral person, she just doesn't have time for casual racism because everybody she can use anybody. Anybody could be her best
Yeah.
friend. And so she's like, I can't, she just doesn't have time for that stuff.
I don't
So
think
she
Case does either. Does he?
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Hmm.
maybe.
Yeah, I
Maybe
don't think
not,
he
maybe
does
not.
either. I
Okay.
think it's very much a
It's the
cop
police.
driven thing that's
Yes.
happening.
Yeah.
A cop driven thing and some of the like hostages that are taken. But mostly it's just like Willem Dafoe's character being an asshole.
Let's talk a little bit about that because I think it's interesting that the film there is this weird double standard that
Mhm.
also jumped out on this watch, which I have to sadly admit did not jump out to me when I first watched it.
Mhm.
And what we're talking about here is when characters are racist. This occurs throughout the film.
Mhm.
Willem Dafoe in particular, but also the other beat cop who finds the bank thing.
Mhm.
He makes racist claims. He almost says the N word at one point. It's
Mhm.
oh my god, this is so ridiculous. And the film very clearly calls that out and
Right.
is disapproving of it. And yet Frasier repeatedly makes homophobic and jokes about sexual assault just like
Mhm.
throughout. Like his dialogue is littered throughout with this. And it's I'm not sure what to make of that. I'm actually curious what you guys think. It was a little bit jarring to me this watch.
It felt to me like someone trying really hard, and by someone I mean the writer, trying really hard to capture that kind of like male machismo cop thing.
Mhm.
Which if I think if you watch enough like stories about cops, that stuff is there. And I think some stories are better at making clear that like this sort of sucks, right? Like it sucks that like this is the way that like
Mhm.
these people like threaten suspects or like joke around with each other. But for me on the second viewing, I think I was a lot less sympathetic to Frasier coming in this time. So I think I approached those concepts as like, yeah, he sort of sucks.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe because in my mind I had convinced myself so much that he took the money
Interesting.
that
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
it surprised me on a more active rewatch that the money is found. And the thing that I wondered about with the money being found is there someone involved in the story who like puts the money back to absolve him? I don't know. I just think the movie would have been more interesting if he had taken it and if there was
Mhm.
more of a complication of who this character is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I love that I like retcon convinced myself about this
Well,
element.
No,
well,
I think we came away with different
I
impressions
think
of
we had different
that.
impressions,
You
but
walked away being 100% he didn't take it. Like that was a
know I was
misunderstanding.
100% until the final bit with the diamond, and the fact that
Mhm.
he's now looking at the diamond, I go, ooh, maybe he also took the 100. But anyway,
Yeah.
Laura
I
had an
had
idea.
assumed it was Madeline.
Who put the
Because
money back?
Madeline, yeah, it's
Mhm.
like
Or just
she
made it go away.
made it go, or like just, how much does it cost? Sure, I'll cut a check and then oh, look, there it is, everybody. Look, we
Mhm.
found it.
Mhm.
Because she also had him get his first order, right? So so I kind of thought that was like part of the deal. We'll take care of this problem for you. We'll get you promoted and you're all set. And then she's pissed because he's still, sniffing around
I think that's
afterwards.
fair,
after all
yeah,
that.
because I don't think she wouldn't say that necessarily in front of the mayor, right? But there's so much emphasis on the missing money in the first
Mhm.
portion of the film that there
Mhm.
was a certain tidiness to the way it was resolved.
Mhm.
So maybe it was
And
just me missing out on the continued evils of Miss White.
So like,
Yeah, because she mentions it in the car when
Oh
they're
yeah,
with
she
the mayor,
immediately
and
brings it up, right?
she immediately brings it up, and it comes off as kind of like a threat. But like with Madeline, everything's a threat and a bribe at the same
Mhm.
time, right?
Mhm.
Like you are gonna let me in because like I have you, and I know you're in trouble, and like you need me, and also like I know your problems, and I can make them go away.
Right. Okay. So
So
then from a philosophical perspective then, does Frasier do something wrong by going after her anyway if she has like done things for him?
well, yeah, I mean, that is interesting. Yeah, he certainly, if did take, so let's suppose he took the money,
Mhm.
she absolved him of it,
Mhm.
and I mean, it's again one of these. It's the same conflict because on the one hand, well, I guess it's a slightly different version of the conflict because on the one hand, you might think there might have been some tacit quid pro quo that now he'd be violating.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, what she did was wrong.
Right.
so
Right.
so like in another sense, you might think, well, maybe even though it was advantageous to him, if you were really doing the right thing, you would somehow turn her in, and then you would also turn yourself in. So that would be like the best thing if you were like following through on the letter of the law. But I think it for me, the reason why I was suspicious whether he took the money was that
Mhm.
he's constantly complaining about money issues.
Mhm.
And he doesn't seem to have a very fancy apartment in New York. Now, yes, it's expensive and everything, but he also has a brother-in-law, sort of brother sister,
Right.
sleeping on the couch. And I feel like if he had 140,000 just lying around, he might have been able to do a little bit better. Now, granted, it's possible that one, he took that money like after, and now he's planning a big thing. But he also claims he doesn't have enough money to get married. So I wonder about that. But the other thing
But
is
isn't
that
it a great cover to not use the money?
of
Like,
course,
isn't it a
yes,
great cover
no,
to
of course,
take the money?
Yeah.
Right. And then continue living exactly as you have.
Yes,
So
and
no one
complaining that you
knows.
don't have enough money.
Right. Yeah, because it would be funny if he was like, I didn't take the money, but I definitely moved into like a super nice apartment.
That's
It's
no, of course.
crazy how that happened.
Of course, that's right. But the other thing is, and I wasn't sure if this was meant to be ironic. It's interesting. It's complicated what the interpretation of that dialogue between him and his boss is at the end.
Mhm.
But he says, did you find it in my summer house? And I was like, wait, does he have a summer house?
no, he
Like,
doesn't have a summer house.
okay, so I don't
No.
know, but maybe he has a summer house because he took the money and he could buy a
No,
summer
he's
house.
just being an ass.
That's what
Phil. It's just like
yeah.
so
yeah.
I wasn't sure what
He's just doing a final dig. Like you really thought that I took it. Do I have a summer house? Like he's
Right.
just being a jerk to his boss in that moment.
Right.
'Cause,
Do you see
he's
me
always
like rolling in the cash? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I like that it's
But
unclear.
even that response, I don't want to know where it came from. I thought was like maybe
Yeah.
he's even not totally sure if it came from
Yeah,
Madeline.
I mean that's a good point too. Like maybe it would. Well, how would Dalton know? Clearly, it's like either like a Madeline or someone affiliated with Madeline who could have taken care of it. But yeah, I mean I think that reading is valid and probably further uh clarifies how pissed she is. when he
Mhm.
starts when he continues to sniff around. But wait, Justin,
Mhm.
can we go back? How did the homophobic stuff strike you this time around? Were you just more noticeable of it, or how did you feel about how the film handled it then?
Yeah, I mean, it was just jarring that the film seemed to explicitly call out the racist stuff to give you a couple examples, Frasier explicitly tells the beat cop, "Hey, man," so there's that. And then the other part when
He says less colorful
yeah, less
language.
colorful
Yes.
language.
Yeah.
And then and when Willem Dafoe is, just just having a great time ranting about racist stuff. There's a lot of side eye being given by Frasier towards him, and the film is, I think, just making it very clear this is bad. But then when
Yeah.
it comes to the homophobic stuff, it's all delivered with jokey language, and they're all
Mhm.
having a good time slapping each other in the back. And the film is never saying, doing any of the same things where it's kind of, hey, this is bad. And so I just was, um, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that, as you pointed out, maybe this is being used as a character development device to show us who these people are.
Yeah.
But then I think, yes, it's doing that with Willem Dafoe, but it's also distancing itself from it, saying but that's obviously not good. We don't like
Mhm.
this. He's kind of bad for this. But in
Mhm.
this film, I wasn't sure if the film is, um, you know, asking us to think of Frasier as a good guy. I mean, he's definitely the protagonist of the film,
Yeah.
and so we're empathizing with him. And I think it takes a little bit of distance from, you have to sort of separate yourself out of that natural empathy that we give to protagonists,
Mhm.
in order to think, oh, this is actually bad. The film doesn't help you do that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And
And
it's Denzel, and he's so
of
charming.
course, and it's Denzel
Even when
Washington, and he's saying it, and you're just like, yeah. And I was laughing along in 2006, so
Mhm.
I'm part of the problem in a way. And then looking back on it, I was thinking, just yeah, it sort of irked me, and it really did jump out because of that sort of double standard.
I also think that
Uh,
16 years ago, both being not a long time ago, but I also do think that a lot of that sort of jokey stuff was I think just how people thought cops talked,
Hmm.
which I think they probably definitely do still talk like
yeah,
that.
sure.
But I think from a writing perspective, it was just oh, they need to threaten a suspect. Let's just do it. So it's one of those things that's odd because I think we're watching it now with a greater awareness of this isn't the best thing to be happening. But on the other hand, I think but they probably would talk like that. So it's hard to determine where exactly is the line. And then to your point, what does the film want us to do about it, if anything? Because the racism stuff, the scene that is most impactful in that way is with the bank employee who is Sikh and very clearly is assaulted and harassed and racially abused by the cops who are taking him down and call him an Arab and do all this stuff. And then later on, it is Willem Dafoe's character Darius, which is hilarious because Darius is a Persian name, it's a Middle Eastern name. Anyway, regardless, he's the one who's no, nobody called you that.
Yeah.
Nobody said that to you. Don't get it twisted. So there's far more work from the film being done that's look at the shit the cops pull just casually every day when dealing with people in this city. And yeah, it goes back again to that question of is there anybody, quote unquote, actually good in this film?
Right.
And it might
Right.
be Frasier's partner.
Yeah.
It might be Ejiofor's character, who is shocked that Denzel would make a a pact with Madeline and
Mhm.
them, right? Because they're talking about it in the command outpost, and I believe Denzel is yeah, I'm just gonna do it. Right? I want to be
And they get
detective.
mine.
I'm just gonna do it. And it's his partner who is a little bit shocked by that. So maybe he's the only one, potentially?
Yeah. All he does is oogle some boobies at one point, I think.
Yeah.
She's right. She says, I can bend down and pick up a pencil for you.
Mhm.
But that's only because he needs to figure out the right body type, right? For the
Yeah,
suspect.
I mean,
that's
that's
all he's
work.
doing. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
all he's doing.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Uh,
professional research.
That's
Totally.
a
So,
professional ogle.
yeah.
Yeah, but I think I took it, and maybe this is like my coming in 2022 with my perspective, and I don't know that I can attribute this to the writer or to Spike Lee's thought process on the casual homophobia and jokes that
hmm
the Denzel character is making. But I had taken that as part of like the sort of further extension, Justin, of like this moral. Everybody's in a messy moral ambiguity space,
hmm
and and so Fraser is obviously acutely aware of racism because that's something that impacts him, and he calls it out as he should. And he's also somebody who defines himself by his heteromasculinity. The
Yes.
first thing that we see
Yeah.
him doing is talking about his dick, basically,
Yeah.
right? Really loudly on the phone.
Mhm.
His partner is sitting 1 foot away. Like, that is on purpose that he's like having that conversation. He's all about like, I'm a man and I have sex with women. And then, and so part of his personality is that he makes derogatory jokes about queer people, and like that I
And
don't
sexual
think
assault
and
and-
sexual
yeah.
assault. Yeah, and I don't think that that's like considered cool in the movie. I think it's just like, look, this guy, it's not called out in the same way, but I think maybe the idea is just like everybody is kind of shitty in some way and has some prejudice and has some blind spots. And I think that conversation when they're in the diner with the Sikh character is really interesting, because I don't quite know what to make of that final joke
Mhm.
that Denzel makes when the bank employee is like, I'm really fucking tired of this. Like, it's been awful for me for the past 5 years after 9/11. Every time I go to an airport, people are making all these assumptions about me. And Denzel's like, yeah, but I bet you can get a cab. And I don't know if that's like, he's just trying to diffuse the situation and it's light, or is he's like about to be like, do you want to start comparing experiences of racial prejudice in this country? Like, do you want to do that with me right now? Like, I
I
don't
definitely
know
think there's an
what the
element
tone
of
is.
the latter. Absolutely, I
Yeah.
think there's an element of the latter. My experiences of that time, I do remember there being an element of that, which was, people of color in this country, immigrants of color. There's always been the question of like, do you align yourself with a certain predominant American racial experience? Do you align yourself with whiteness, or do you align yourself with blackness? And I remember those conversations happening after 9/11, because like the texture of races and cultures and how they're treated within the US changed so significantly in such a short period of time. So I definitely took it as, do you really want to be complaining about this to 2 black cops in New York City? Right? So I do think, again, that is sort of an element of like Denzel's and this character's identity, and how much of it is shaped by him being essentially an agent of the state. What does like that implicit power structure, what has that changed in how he approaches these situations and the authority that he gives himself? So I think he is sympathetic up until the point, and then it becomes again like, look, I don't really care, right? I mean, like, there are hostages in the bank. I don't really care. Like, I'm the one who's supposed to fix this. So I think that there are a couple of brief moments like that where we're asked a little bit potentially to interrogate these characters and whether them being on the inside, and the question becomes, who is the inside man of the title? Like, if them being inside these systems is a good thing or a bad thing for themselves, for the system, or for the people outside of it. It's hard now watching this movie in a certain way, because I do remember thinking it's great that Frasier got the diamond, and now I'm like, oh, is it bad that he got the diamond?
Yeah, I mean, it
I don't know.
whether it's good or bad, whether you think it's good or bad is going to depend on, I think, where you fall on these kind of
Right.
complicated moral issues. And I should also just say that
That you would take the diamond?
for sure. I'm sorry, I do have more leanings in that direction. But anyway,
For sure.
but I do think that like concern about like these characters not being morally perfect or whatever, and the film's reaction, like that doesn't really color my how I view the film. I think it's
Right.
perfectly fine. I think it's like a little bit awkward to like maybe recommend this film full-throatedly to someone today because of that, but I don't think like it detracts significantly from its aesthetic value, and so I just want to make that clear. But yeah, on the thing you said, Roxana, about
Mhm.
like these men who are part of a group which has been historically harassed and oppressed by the system of policing in the US, being a part of that system. It's very interesting in the context of a Spike Lee film. And this is something. I mean, Laura, I want to let you speak to this because you read the Boots Riley stuff. So I mean, to me, this really feels like a film made by someone who has very mixed feelings but complex feelings about the police, and not in the sense of, it does not feel like it's made by, what's I think is so interesting is this does not feel like it's made by the same person in this regard as who made Do the Right Thing. I
Mhm.
mean, I think Do the Right Thing, which I love, I think it's what actually probably my favorite Spike Lee film is, I think, very polemic and very black and white about its view about the police and about the relationship between police and communities and policing and race and so on. But this film is incredibly gray, and
Mhm.
by having the two lead detectives here be black and engage in this very complex tete-a-tete with their maybe superior, maybe not superior, in because I don't really know what the power structure is with Willem Dafoe and who's in
Mhm.
charge. They're jockeying back and forth periodically, and um, I think it's really interesting. And to what extent are they complicit in this system, which remains, as Spike Lee would no doubt agree, incredibly racist and in need of reform, and are they actually doing anything to change that? Because they don't in this film, as far as I can tell. They're just merely doing their jobs and in Denzel's case, getting his right. He's explicit, I'm getting mine, I'm getting first detective or whatever, first class, and that's it. Like he's not particularly interested in um trying to correct for these kinds of imbalances. And again, I don't think like we should necessarily read that as like some character flaw of him or something. I think Spike Lee's just like, yeah, this is it. This is this is an interesting situation to be as a black cop in New York.
And I think I will quickly say this before we talk about Boots Riley. Let's absolutely talk about Boots Riley.
Oh gosh.
But I just think that this is for Spike's later career. I think these questions come up quite often because I
Hmm.
feel like Black Klansman and Da 5 Bloods also sort of take angles of this. I mean, Da 5 Bloods is very much about, right, like Vietnam and like what Americans did in Vietnam, whether you were white, whether you were black, and like what are the implications again of imperialism on an international scale compared with racism on a national scale. So I think that yes, I think he's interested in exploring these things without necessarily making a definitive, you have to be the person who is consistently making change, right? I don't think he's necessarily compelled to make that kind of statement. But let's talk about Boots. I'm so excited. What did you read?
Oh gosh.
Well, this is in
I know,
regards
so much
to,
pressure now.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I definitely can't. I will just like in very broad strokes to say what I was also thinking about this being a movie about the police protagonists for Spike Lee,
Mhm.
which obviously that's something, and so that he comes back to a couple times in his career, but not a lot. But the 2018 Black Klansman, Boots Riley had like a 3-page essay that he tweeted out
Oh,
because
I
he
remember.
really. Yes, right.
Yeah.
He,
Yeah.
started off being like, I love Spike Lee. He inspires me as a filmmaker. Like, he's the reason I'm a filmmaker, but also, like, this movie is bullshit. It's kind of like what his
Right.
3-page screed was. And he felt like it was doing that the film was doing harm. He points out the sort of historical facts of the real life Ron Stallworth.
That are sort of
And
messed with in the film, yeah.
Right. Apparently, he was actually infiltrating Black radical groups for 3 years, not
Mm-hmm.
the Ku Klux Klan. And he felt like to show, to show the police sort of like in the 70s, 80s, when was Black Klansman like actively fighting racism and like fighting for racial equality felt like inaccurate and wrong and harmful.
Mm-hmm.
If I can like speak in really broad strokes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
still there on Twitter. He hasn't, you can go and look at Boots Riley's 3-page thought on Black Klansmen. But I Black Klansman is such an interesting movie, and I've only seen it once, so I don't know. I feel very ill qualified to talk about this, but the scene that it starts off with Alec Baldwin shows scenes from Birth of a Nation, right, Jess?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like it's so if like the character of Ron Stallworth is grappling with the fact that he wants to be a police officer, he's interested in investigating. This is something he's passionate about, but he's also in an institution that has done harm to people of color, and he's like in some ways trying to like adjust for that in his own career, but maybe he's not. And like, can you be his girlfriend is always like, I'm not down with you being in the police. This is really fucked up. And he's in that, and he's trying to like, just figure out that zone for himself. And then Spike Lee is interested in making narrative films that are entertaining. And he has to do that within the Hollywood system in some sense. And also the film language that he's using is like intrinsic. It was born with films that were racist, like Birth of a Nation, and like how does he live in that space too?
And what are the
so
responsibilities of you as like a Black person or a person of color to like take that upon yourself?
Right.
And I think that's something that comes up like in questions of representation all the time is like, in what elements are you able as an individual to make change, and how do you enact that and prioritize that? And yes, also, how are you working within systems that for a long time were purely white perspectives? So there is also obviously like a long history of art and cinema basically everywhere around the world, right? Like we talk about these things as if like there is a white canon, and there absolutely is. But there also were movements that were like all around the world, right? And like all within different communities. So I think it's just an impossible question to answer. Wikipedia tells me that Spike did respond and said, quote, "I'm never going to say that all police are corrupt, that all police hate people of color." So I think for Spike too, it's this question of like, as an individual within that system, like morally, what are the limits of what you can do and what you can achieve? And when you look out for yourself on an individual basis. Now, what I'll say about Boots, and I love Boots, but I just think it's very interesting that Boots' next project is through Amazon Prime Video. That's all I'll say. All I will say about Boots.
I mean, we're all like, yeah.
I think I watched Sorry to Bother You on Amazon, which was so eventually it made its way. The first one made its way there. So, yeah.
Yeah,
On
we're
Prime.
all part of systems.
Yeah, I mean well, exactly, and I think that's the difference.
What
so
do you do?
For me, you have Do the Right Thing, which feels like it's made by a young filmmaker with ideals, and they've got a moral perspective, and it's
he's
very
mad.
clear. He's mad, and it's a film of protest, and it's inspiring and all that. This film is, by contrasting, just incredibly morally murky. Every character is shot through with dilemmas, and there's no easy solution to their problems. They're all good in various ways, bad in various ways, maybe Madeline accepted. And it is, I think, a movie made by somebody who's, what would it be, like 20 some odd years older. And that's just one of the things that I found, like, this is not to discount the valuable contributions of young people engaged in protest. I think it's absolutely essential and vital that people take hard lines and pursue them as far as they can. But it is one of these strange things that as you get older and you have that, like, you just are faced with more complexity in the world, and you become part of systems that you might have previously hated, and there's a kind of inevitability to that you realize that you begin to maybe soften and develop a slightly more complex attitude towards these things. Like, for instance, the institution of the police, which I should say, like, I mean, as Spike said, I think I agree with that, like, on the one hand, it's if you say this, it's like a political thing. So let me specify what I'm about to say is I'm going to agree with Spike on the statement of fact that not all police are bad. Fine. I'm not saying that to make a political statement that is in defiance of Black Lives Matter or anything like that. It's one of these things that it's at that level of complexity. It's like somehow recognizing that is, I think, compatible with, and I think Spike would agree with this, nonetheless thinking that institution itself is in desperate need of reform and these change, but also thinking that reform shouldn't fall as the responsibility only on the people of color within that system. Like it's one of these things to think like, oh, somehow Frazier, because he's a black cop, is like more responsible for these kinds of change. And I think the answer there should be no. Like, Willem Dafoe is equally responsible and needs to enact that change and be an ally to black cops and black people and non-cops and so on. He's not. And we somehow like might think, oh, this guy, he's just a racist, so like forget him, like he's we can't reach him, but we can reach maybe Frazier, so we kind of go after Frazier. But I think like that is unfair. That puts an undue burden on people of color who are working within these systems, thinking it's their responsibility, when I think anyway, so I don't want to say like, oh, it's somehow like a greater moral failing of him that he's within this system, like not doing anything. And I think Spike doesn't see that. I think Spike sees it as like, this is complex, and he's in a tough spot, and him getting his is a totally reasonable view. And and that's why I think like, but I do feel also the pull of probably, like, he is drawing. What I think is interesting is he's drawing that parallel. So suppose Frazier really did take the 140, and suppose at the end he takes the diamond. Spike's drawing that parallel between him and Case. And I think that's interesting. Like, they're not morally on a par, for sure. But it's interesting to see the connection there that, like, I didn't see when I first saw it. And seeing it now, I'm like, it's just much, it's messy and complicated in ways that I think there are no easy answers. And I think we sometimes want there to be an easy answer so we could just be like good, bad, evil, and I think showing these characters with all their warts and everything is, as you put it, Roxana, like a way of helping us maybe to appreciate that, just because Spike Lee is a black director who loves Denzel Washington, the character Denzel Washington plays isn't going to necessarily be a moral saint.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that, I had not necessarily thought about a Frazier Case connection, but I feel like it's a very interesting thing to consider if you're going to make the argument that Frazier, as someone who is a police officer, has advantages against other people. Of course, not to the level of Case being an ambitious, like, Swiss banker, right? Who like saw opportunities to look the other way. But maybe Frazier has had opportunities to look the other way. If he took the 140, he certainly did. So I think there is a parallel there that I certainly hadn't thought about the first time that I was watching it. And then then it becomes, if we're going to expand that idea, then it becomes, where does Dalton fall in that?
Yeah.
Like, is Dalton inherently good? And I want to say yes, because apparently I don't care about the experiences of the hostage. I'm just like, sorry.
They didn't have it that bad.
They didn't have it that bad. You guys got
They got
pizza?
2 meals.
Like,
Yeah, they got pizza from Sal's. Was it Sal's?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like it's fine. You probably didn't have to go to work that day. It was like a day off. You just got like police brutalized a little bit. Like, whatever.
Yeah, I
Just
mean,
a little bit. I know they
I
didn't.
forgot about that part, that they get like accused of being bank robbers, and some of them got shot with rubber bullets and stuff.
Yeah, no,
so.
the end, I think the end of the film is perhaps the closest we get to Spike just being like, yeah, the police are fucked up, right? Because they do swarm, they do attack these people. Clearly, none of them have weapons. I think they're all still zip tied, or at least some of them are zip tied. So there's very clearly a like, what is the actual threat here? There's not one. and you are doing all this. So I think maybe that's the most clear delineation of perspective there.
Yeah,
But
I think that's
otherwise,
right.
yeah, but otherwise with Dalton, I'm like, no, Dalton's good. I approve of everything he
Well,
did. I have
let's
no changes, no edits, and no notes.
I think you're right though that Dalton embodies he speaks for Spike Lee in various parts. So
Yeah,
the part when he's sitting, I think this is actually an incredibly iconic shot when they're in it's him and the young boy who has the video game and they're
in the vault.
in the vault and they're sitting on blocks of money.
Yeah.
And it is just I mean it's a great shot and it's just pushing in and he takes the game and the game is like this feels like it's like
It's GTA,
it's
right?
well,
It
yeah, but it's
feels like
like
a Grand Theft
incredibly
Auto spin.
racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes, yes.
incredibly racist version. And you feel like now Dalton speaks with Spike Lee's voice when he's just like,
What's the point of this?
Like my man 50 says, get rich, die trying. Yo, you get mad points for knocking over the bank.
I think that's cool.
Hell yeah. You trying to get paid too?
Finish your slice, I'll take you back to your father. I gotta talk to him about this game.
so Dalton, he does give Dalton his moral mouthpiece, I think, periodically. And Dalton has these addresses to camera, as you said, you know, he's breaking the fourth wall. He is the narrator of the film in that regard.
Mhm.
And the narrator is not always identified with the filmmaker, but in this case it really does feel like he comes the closest. I mean Frasier maybe a little bit too, I think, but yeah.
I feel like Dalton is at least taking the place of someone who knows that there are people in this world who've gotten away with things for which they will never be held to account. And like when you know that, like when you're aware of that, what is your burden of responsibility, right? Like, so we've had the cops conversation. Like, if you're a cop and like this is your job or whatever, and you know your fellow cops suck, like, what can you do, to change that or redeem that? Which, to your point, is Fraser telling the constable, like, maybe be slightly less shitty when talking to me, like maybe do less. But yeah, but then you have like the Dalton character and like the crew that he runs with. And then I believe it's like a Jewish professor who is their way in,
Yep.
correct? Who is
Yeah.
like, again, the quote unquote inside man who is working with them to pull off this heist. So I think then that becomes the question of like, when you're aware of wrongdoing on that sort of scale, and there is something that you can do you do it? Do you make that choice?
This is good. So I actually
The
think
rest was bad, but this part of it is
this
good.
part would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I actually tell me what you think about this. So I think my read on it is that their plan was exactly what Madeline says,
Mm-hmm.
but then they change it at the last second. So what Madeline says is they steal the diamonds
Mm-hmm.
and then they take the Nazi stuff. And the plan is to use that to blackmail him into basically calling off the investigation to get away. And then there's no plan really to like reveal it. It's just like middle finger to you, we're stealing the money. But then Dalton switches gears, right? He leaves the ring in the mailbox. And they're like, and I think it's interesting that the rest of the crew is like, wait, why'd you do that? And that's when he says respect is the only currency. And so he's sort of like tipping his hat to he realizes that Frasier's like I don't know, a good cop in the sense that he will actually like pursue this thread.
Mm-hmm.
And so he thinks, okay, I can kind of have it both ways. I can get the money and I can take the veil off of people's eyes and have them see this guy for who he is. But my read is that wasn't the plan going in. That the plan, just because of how they react to him
Yeah.
leaving the ring in the.
I think it wasn't the plan going in. I agree with you, but my theory was that he does that because Case tries to stop them. Like I thought that was a response to Madeline, not necessarily a response to Frasier. Like I think there is a sort of shared recognition that he and Frasier have for each other. Like you're both going to take this to the limit. Like I see that in you because I see that in myself. But I also felt like he when Madeline appears, that to me felt like an extra, like, you know what, like, fuck this guy. Like, he's not gonna get away with this. Like,
Interesting. Yeah.
and so I that sort of felt like if you are going to work to protect this man, then I'm going to work as well to
Mm.
reveal him perhaps in a way that we hadn't initially planned to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, if you think of it as the main, so we agree he changes his mind somewhere,
Yeah.
but if you think of it as him going in, because you might just think like, what do you do with that information? One thing you do is you just profit from it at that
Sure.
person's expense. And then like that's different. It's not going all the way with unveiling them and having them, I don't know, stand trial in the court of public opinion. It's just basically privately screw them over. But it is another thing to say, okay, let's have this bear itself out in the public sphere and have them face some kind of procedural trial, right? Not that I mean, maybe he would be tried for war crimes. I mean, presumably, I guess if the evidence is strong enough, he could be tried for war crimes. That's what
Mhm.
that's the word Fraser uses at the end. So I do think like it is interesting that yeah, I get that is like a much more extreme and again procedural, right? Like this is
Mhm.
a violation of rights and we're now going to hold you to account as we do with one another, which is namely in the court system. That's the only real, I mean, I guess you could think the public opinion is a similar way of holding people to account, but that's different from just like privately screwing them over. And I was also thinking it's interesting too that Frasier incites a fight with Madeline and the mayor too at the end, right? By
Mhm.
revealing, okay, I recorded you. You tried to basically, you threatened me. Now I'm going to blackmail you. And it's interesting to think about like what his reasons are there. I wasn't clear. I mean, one is that he's basically getting them off his back so he can continue this operation unheeded because he was thinking, well, maybe they would impede me if I could pursue this. So let me show you my hand that I actually, I have dirt on you. But another thing is that it's a middle finger to them because they've been kind of shitting on him this whole time, thinking we got more power on you. And it's just a way of him sort of, because he is this guy, as to Laura's point, like he's very interested in being on top, right? And
Mhm.
like, he's very machismo and all that. So like maybe this is just a kind of another show of dominance. I wasn't clear, but I think either way, it's interesting that he incorporates them into his plans.
Right. He wants to win. And so
Yeah.
he's gonna figure out a way to win. And then to Laura's point, like, if we do say that Madeline is the one who, like, cleared up the money, then, like, pretty much in every way, he came out on top. The only thing that I would say that is interesting to me now, further thinking about it, about Dalton being like follow the ring, is that Dalton is also putting his trust now in the police and in the courts. And I'm like, does that fit with this character who otherwise like pulled off a bank heist because he knew that like there would be no repercussions theoretically for this man. So it is sort of interesting if we think about it like there was no like public reveal component of the heist as first planned. It is sort of interesting to me that like midway through this you'd be like, "You know what? You know what's going to work actually? All these systems that normally don't work." So that's sort of
Totally.
funny.
Yeah. And by doing that, he potentially loses his leverage, right, over
Mhm.
case. So now maybe, he could be, I mean, maybe he just thinks I've gotten away with it. So at
Yeah,
this point, it's
it's
like,
totally possible. They have the
fine.
diamonds, they're
Yeah.
out. They'll
Um,
go wherever and do whatever. That's totally
yeah.
possible. Yeah.
But yeah, it is. I mean, here's one other kind of slightly inexplicable thing. I
Mhm.
don't know. Maybe you guys have an explanation of this. Normally, I don't want to sit here. This is not a nitpick podcast. So, but it was something that I think maybe somebody has said this to me before. But anyway, it is a little bit weird that Arthur Case doesn't go and just retrieve the contents of the safety deposit box as soon as the bank is then open. So the way it looks like is that the police have the bank all tied up, right? They're looking here and they're looking there. Then they say, okay, we didn't find anything. Case called off, and then the bank is open. And then the next time we see um Fraser go into the bank, there's all these people there. So presumably there was time for Case to go in and take the
It's been a
contents of
week.
the
Yeah, like it's been a week that Clive has been in the wall.
He's just been chilling there, and maybe the
Yeah.
police have locked it up for 6 days. I don't know, but there's been at least some period of time when it's been
Mhm.
open, and so he had time to go in there and get it, and he didn't. And so that is and you might think like, okay, one, there's the Nazi stuff, but like two, there's also the diamonds. Like you might want to get those diamonds out of there. Um, and anyway, especially if you suspect that the robbers are going after that. I mean, maybe now, I guess maybe the argument would be like he thought they got it. So he's just sort of like, damn, but I would check. I would want to check at least. Anyway,
Yeah.
Well, we don't know that he didn't, do we?
Well, the reason I would have thought he didn't check is because if he had opened it up, then he would have seen, okay, there's
There's a note to
There's
a
a note to
guy
the
and
cops
this
and-
ring, this incredibly
Mhm.
incriminating
the
ring.
And I would
Yeah,
have wanted to take
that's
that
fair.
ring out of the, Anyway, but
Yeah.
so anyway, it's just like it's one of those, but whatever. I'm not thinking about this because the film is very slick and it just goes
Mhm.
by, and I'm
Well,
I'm too
maybe-
busy trying to figure out where Clive Owen is and how he's going to get
Mhm.
out of there. So
I know. That honestly didn't occur to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, this maybe is a silly explanation, but maybe he has a guilty conscience and he wants to get caught.
Oh
Why
my
do you hold on
gosh.
to the Nazi documentation all
The
this
Nazi
good
time?
point.
documentation, honestly, I'm sorry, is hilarious.
Yeah.
Who was
I
like,
mean-
you know what? I'm gonna keep as a memento this
Yeah.
paperwork that was like, hey, Mr. Nazi, thank you for doing Nazi stuff. Like, what?
Yeah.
The
Thanks for-
actual
Yeah. Grade A+ Nazi.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm gonna keep my report card. Yeah, I mean, even Dalton says like he should have destroyed this. For sure
Yeah.
he should have, but he didn't. That's on him. But I want like what explanation would you have at all for hanging on to that? Besides maybe like it is your like reminder that you have done something awful
Yeah.
in your life, and
Mhm.
you can't, like you go back, you
It's
look at
your-
it, you
yeah.
think about it, and you're like, I gotta do good. Like
Yeah.
I gotta like
Mhm.
Donate
gotta-
another $1 million to the cancer research.
yeah, I
fund
gotta
and-
donate another
Right.
million. So in
The
that sense,
synagogue.
like, I don't know. There's like, I've got a little bit of compassion for Case. Is that crazy?
No,
Have
I
I
think-
been in philanthropy for too long, Justin?
I've been trying to make the case that Case is not like an all-out villain. I mean, I'm just
He's pretty close. He's
No, he is
pretty
bad.
close.
He did bad
keep his
things.
Nazi report card. That's pretty bad.
That was stupid.
I was
That
not
was dumb.
smart.
It's exactly like apt pupil, where I'm like, why did you keep your Nazi outfit? Like, why did you not get rid of it? What
Some
are you
people
doing?
they like the look. I mean,
Oh my
it's
gosh.
it's like they got the whatever is Hugo Boss look.
I don't know.
Shout out
So-
to Prince Harry. Wasn't he a Nazi for Halloween one year?
Is
Oh,
that true?
gosh.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Oh, Harry.
Oh, Harry.
He seems like he's gotten his act together.
He seems like he's in a
well,
better place. But yeah, not
I remember,
not ideal.
yeah, it was right around this time too, because I remember I was in London for like just a semester in college, and I felt like we get like, I don't know what it's sort of like the post equivalent, but they have these like free papers that you get at the Tube, and they're every day it was just like a picture of like Harry drunk somewhere, and they're like, Harry's at it again.
Poor Harry. Harry's had a hard life. Yeah, Prince Harry. January 13th, 2005. Prince Harry apologizes for Nazi costume. Wore it to a costume
Yeah.
party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, that was 2005, and it wasn't even. It was like, when was the Yale Halloween incident? That was
2015.
2015. So
Yeah.
it's still a problem.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
definitely will
so-
still be a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that guiding question of like, on a scale of 1 to a million, how bad is Case? Is an interesting. I mean, is there anything you can do to redeem a terrible act? And
Right.
the
Yeah.
film says no, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know where I fall on that. I don't know.
I-
I think
on this-
no, but I don't know.
Well, on this point, the most sort of vocal proponents of the kind of consequentialism, which would say the answer is yes, and it might actually be a lot lower than you might expect, is this movement, which has kind of gained a lot of notoriety today, called effective altruism. And one of the subsidiary views of this is this idea called earn to give. So the idea is like Laura's
You
shaking her
have to
head, but
become a billionaire by hurting
exactly.
other people so that you
Yes,
Yeah.
can help the people that like you
exactly.
essentially hurt. Like you
Exactly.
Yeah.
need it.
You can help the people according to your own very specific
Exactly.
agendas.
Yeah.
And
So,
that's how it
well,
should be.
but look, but even if, but no, but we're always trying to help according to our own specific agenda, right? Like that's inevitable that we
Yes.
have our own whatever
Well,
causes that are
yes and
valuable
no. I
to
mean, there are
us.
certain
Um,
things that you just do for commonality. Like taxes are a commonality, right? Like if I
Yeah.
could pay my taxes and like not give anything to the US military, like I would do that. But that's not how it works, right? There's
yeah,
like a general like commonality of things that we just pay for, and that's part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like philanthropy at a certain level, I worked for 8.5 years in philanthropy. Philanthropy at a certain level is just people's individual agendas. It's what they choose to
Mhm.
support. It is not systemic, right? It is not necessarily addressing core problems. It's addressing effects of the problems, and therefore the cycle continues, right? So that's like the complicating part of that ideology.
yeah.
Sure.
But
And yeah, of course, like anybody who is wealthy enough to make, very large donations, probably yes, like did it by hurting somebody else, by exploiting labor, by something. Like, I mean, maybe that's an
or
extreme
they
thing
just
to say,
inherited it.
or they just inherited it, but that has its own stuff. I
They
Sure.
mean,
inherited it
and I worked in
from
From
someone
fundraising.
who exploited other
Yeah,
people's labor.
yeah, exactly.
Yes. I once went to an event of generous supporters of a university, and Professor Walter Johnson, who's a historian of African American history, was like, all capitalism is built on slavery. And like to like these wealthy people who are there
I love
to
it.
support education, and they were like, there's like everybody, like the look on
It's
their
just silence,
faces.
right?
They were like,
Yeah.
all capitalism?
Good
What
me.
what an absolute boss. Shout out
That
It
to
is
was
Professor
good.
Walter Johnson.
amazing.
Yeah.
I was like, I
Yeah.
mean, as somebody who organized the event, I was like, oh no. And it's like, but like, and as a human, I was like, that was awesome.
Sorry. I just
All
want to clarify.
capitalism is built on slavery. Please take out your checks and donate generously to our institution. Thank you so much.
I just want to clarify though the thing about the like it's just your I don't know whatever your own particular thing. I mean, if you
Mhm.
the choice is between making a lot of money and then donating it to your causes or just volunteering for those causes, right? That's the choice we're considering. That's the like effective
Or
altruist
paying your
choice.
taxes as you
Of course,
should.
paying taxes is a given. We're not
Not
nobody's
for
saying
billionaires.
don't pay your
They're
taxes.
Justin,
trying
it's
not
really
to.
not a given.
That- for this purpose of this conversation, it's a given. All
Okay.
right, so the choice then is between okay, suppose you want to do good. You're like, what do we do? This is the effective altruist argument. It's like, do you like go and donate your time to Oxfam? And yeah, you'll do some
Mhm.
good. And maybe you care about that. Fine. Or do you become a billionaire and then donate like millions and millions of dollars to Oxfam? The effective altruist says, do the latter because you're gonna do more good. That's the argument at least,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's
Mhm.
it's just like a yes, in the process of getting those billions though, all kinds of stuff you're going to do all kinds of bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
Presumably, right? But you're going to get those billions and get them to Oxfam or whatever, millions to Oxfam. So that's the like kind of extreme version of this view that's like
Mhm.
floating around there out there and it's just been on my mind because of the Sam Blankman-Fried stuff and
Mhm.
I think what happened there in that case from what I know, of course is going to get adjudicated in the courts, is that he basically acted with that kind of impunity. What he was doing was like funneling money from FTX into his own company on the grounds that like, well, this is good for everyone in the long run. This is how this is going to prop up the system and everything. And
Some
it's just
serious vehement head shaking.
yeah, he was wrong, but like in his own mind, like that's the attitude. And I think I'm not an effective altruist. I don't like agree with this position or anything. And there's all kinds of strange outcomes that come out of that, including what's called long-termism, which is this view that like forget the problems of today. We should be trying to make people in next, survive for billions of years. Because think of how much good you would do if people survive for billions of years. Their lives are going to be so much better.
Terrible.
Who cares about
No.
our lives?
Awful.
That's where this view ends up.
You
And
know what that
it's-
view is? That view is someone who read Twilight and saw that the Cullens were like millionaires because they were vampires. And that's where that view comes from. That view is bad. How
It's
dare
a-
you?
It is a ridiculous view, but now that you're telling me it's coming from Twilight, I'm a
We're like,
little
is
bit
it
more
good though?
sympathetic
Wait a
to
second.
Yeah. You're like, well, maybe actually it is
Hmm.
compelling. I mean, I think the
Um,
thing that is like so difficult for me with that ideology is like aren't we living in like the most wealth disparity like time? It's
Yes.
like, it's like, yeah, I mean, like the Middle Ages were bad and like the Crusades were bad, like all that stuff was bad, but like now is also pretty bad.
Yeah.
And like a couple hundred years of philanthropy has not necessarily changed that, which isn't to say that it hasn't affected individual lives. Like, I don't want to say that because I think like scholarships, those are good. But like at the same time, things are really not awesome for a lot of people who are
Yeah.
alive. And
Yeah.
these things haven't really helped. So
Yeah. And we have to help those people. And I think that's the thing is it's like, so again, we come back to this central conflict. That's the thing I wanted to start us off with. We'll just maybe end with this. It's just,
mhm.
again, it's like we have this kind of just basic duty to one another to help one another. And it's like if we get too carried away, if we don't think about that, we get too carried away with just like, no, like do the most good for the most people. Then you start thinking, well, there's all these people who have never been born. Let's do good for them. And you go, wait, actually, this is getting ridiculous because we're neglecting the duties we have to the people who actually exist right here and now. Anyway,
Right.
there's a lot of philosophical literature I'm glossing over, and it's actually really complicated. So I'd say that to my colleagues who might be listening. Yes, I understand there's like complications. We're not going to go into those. But I just think it's interesting that this film is like not tackling, but at least is uh,
Raising
uh,
questions about.
exactly. Yeah. It's a through line to the film. Roxana, I want to ask you this before we let you go.
hmm
Spike Lee,
hmm
just this film, where does it fall for you within his filmography? Like, is it in like the top half,
hmm
bottom half, and like, what is your favorite Spike Lee film?
It's definitely in the top half. And my favorite Spike film is still 25th Hour, which I think does a lot of similar things to this film as ask, like, when you take stock of your life from a moral perspective, when you're a quote unquote bad person, what happens after that? Right?
Mm,
Like, how do you reconcile your own badness and how do you make amends with people? And how do you view the future when you have this awareness of your own self that is not positive? So I really love that film and how it also asks those questions against the backdrop of 9/11. Edward Norton is great in it. So yeah, so I think that's probably my favorite Spike. Inside Man is up there for me. I like when he asks these sort of larger consideration questions about personhood and how do you address the knowledge of yourself. So I like all that stuff. The final thing that I will say about Inside Man is it's very funny to me that the person who wrote this film has like never written anything else. And I'm like, does
huh.
this person actually exist? Like,
Mm.
who is Russell Gewirtz? Like, who are you, sir? What happened to your career?
Hmm.
But yeah, that's where I'll
That's
end on.
interesting. I
Yeah.
did not know that. Huh. That's surprising.
He wrote Righteous Kill a couple years later,
Mm,
which was like a De Niro Pacino movie where they're like NYPD detectives. And it was like not very good, but it sort of had like an Inside Man flavor. It just
mm,
very clearly was like, can I redo the thing that I did really well the first time around? And he could not. So,
mm.
yeah.
Mm.
Well, I do really like this movie. I still like this movie. I
Mhm.
hope that we'll be able to do more Spike Lee on this podcast. Roxana, thank you so much for coming
Oh,
on.
thank you guys.
Where can people read your work and find you on social media?
Sure. You can read my stuff at Vulture. I write about TV every so often. I write about film as well. And you can still find me on Twitter. I don't know how long that'll be for, but for now, you can still find me there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And we are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com. And we're not wearing our cow shirts, but you can buy a shirt with 2 cows on it at cowspod.threadless.com. And in 2 weeks, we will be talking to, if all goes according to plan, we'll be talking to John DeVore about Willow. So that will be
Nice.
coming up. And yeah, thanks. And remember to, I should say this every time, but I don't because I feel weird about saying this sort of thing, but if you are kind enough to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, that helps the podcast out a lot. So thank you very much for doing that. Please do it. We're
Use your
desperate for
effective altruism
reviews.
to support the podcast. Like, what are you people
Yeah.
doing? Come on.
Yeah. You can
Yeah.
request stuff on there.
Exploit
too.
some labor, get really rich, give us the money,
Mhm.
and then
That-
you
Look,
know
reviews
do
cost
some good.
nothing. It takes 2 seconds, and it would do so much good.
Mhm.
Anyway, thanks.
So I was
everyone.
just trying to make a Patreon happen really quick.
A Patreon?
No.
We're not doing that.
Hit like, smash that subscribe button, and come back in 2 weeks.
So embarrassing. All right, thanks.